Good morning, I'm Olivia from the TBA and welcome to today's webinar. Thank you for joining us. We will shortly be joined by TBA Deputy Chairman Philip Newton and TBA National Hunt Committee Chairman Bryan Mayoh, who will be having a conversation based on the breeding industry report which the TBA published earlier this week. If you have any questions, please do not hesitate to use the Q&A tool on your screen and we will answer these at the end of the talk. I will now hand over to Bryan to start up the webinar.
Good morning. I briefly had to remember to unmute before I did that. Normally, I'm used to giving presentations of immaculately produced slides, giving a coherent argument from beginning to end. However, on this occasion, my colleague Philip has come up with a plan of almost Baldric-like cunning, namely that we'd assume that everyone watching this has read the report fully, and we'd have a conversation about it, just reinforcing what you've read already. Well, just so that Philip can show me how well this works, I'm going to ask him the first question, and I'll be able to see how it's done. So Philip, the TBA has had 2 economic impact surveys in the last few years. We had one in 2014, one in 2018. Why do we need this report now?
Morning, Bryan. I mean, this isn't anything very different for you and I. I mean, we've sat in a million different places talking about the industry over an 8-year period. So just go with the flow. Why do we need to do it? Responsibility and relevance comes to mind. Responsibility because the TBA has responsibility for the breeding industry, the health of the breeding industry, and that the supply chain, that's relevant to the whole of the industry, and that what we need to be absolutely certain that we can do, particularly with the pressure that the whole of the racing industry is under in respect of prize money, is that we have a racing program that provides an attractive proposition, both as a spectator option and also as a betting proposition. Whether we like it or whether we don't, a lot of our funding is absolutely dependent upon the latter, and that we need to have the horses to fulfill the programme. We talked about this at the board. We've had 2 economic impact studies, as you've alluded to, 2014 and 2018. They were key documents as far as the TBA was concerned, and in many ways the 2018 one was a great deal more important because we could benchmark. Now, I've lived with alongside and worked alongside you over the last 8 or 9 years, and that numbers are your game. I could see that we had all of the data around us to be able to draw some conclusions from for the current economic circumstances. We know that the breeding industry was under significant pressure. This isn't meant to be an alarmist document. What this is meant to be is a roadmap for us to decide how we want to shape and how we should shape the future in the best interest of the industry. So it would have been folly to have said or thought that COVID isn't going to have an impact on the economics of the industry. It has to. We absolutely knew that, as I said, that the industry was already under pressure in 2018. So what we did, what you did, what I did, what Claire and Julian and the rest of the board did, we started to pull together everything. We took a survey of our members, and then you very sensibly said, we need an economic benchmark, and the 2008 financial crisis came in. So without stealing your thunder, that's the background for it. This is a roadmap, and that's what we want it to be seen as. The TBA are taking responsibility for the breeding industry. It is our responsibility, and we should be leading the way. Now I'm going to push you into the numbers.
As often, Philip, you did steal my thunder, because I was going to start by talking about 2008. Can we have the first slide up, please? Basically, the assumption is that if we're going to look at the possible impacts and the maybe probable impacts of COVID and the economic crisis caused by COVID on breeding and racing, we should look into the most recent parallel, which was the 2008 financial crisis. Now, this particular slide shows just 2 graphs of what happened then. The top line shows the number of starts in British racing after the 2008 financial crisis. That's a very important metric because number of starts drive betting turnover, often drive picture rights and so on. So number of starts is something that we absolutely have to focus on as relevant to the health of British racing. The bottom slide shows something that's far less talked about normally, but which is very important to breeders, the number of foals being produced. And in this case, we're showing the number of foals produced in Britain and Ireland, because those countries are primarily the two countries that feed British racing. Now, what happened after 2008, if you look at the top line, is the total number of starts dropped immediately as owners felt the crisis. But fairly quickly, 2 years later, it started to pick back up again. So it rose from its minimum level of just about -6% and it went back up. But then something else came into play. By that time, look at the bottom line. The number of foals being produced in Britain and Ireland was very much lower than before, drops of between 30 and 40% across the two countries. And so as owners started to recover and try to reinvest, there simply weren't enough horses coming through into the racing program. And so the recovery stalled. So the top line bumped along for several years, getting slightly worse, and only started to recover when the number of foals began to increase again and come back up. So there is a definite correlation with a lag between the two. Now, it doesn't look too dramatic what happened to the number of starts in 2008, but at the time of the 2008 financial crisis, work that I've done suggests that there was considerable overproduction of foals, much more than there is today. So if the same thing happens again, the effects could be more dramatic. Hopefully they won't be, but they could well be if the same happens as 2008. So let's have a look at the next slide. This shows what might happen. And again, it starts off, it concentrates heavily on the number of starts, those factors that are relevant to the health of British racing. So again, an assumption is that there will be an initial fall, and there is some evidence of initial falls already as owners begin to feel the pressure. There is also evidence of initial falls in sales activity. Now, I'm sure you're all aware that some sales have appeared very successful. There was a very successful one in Doncaster last week of stores, but other sales were less successful than in previous years. When we looked at 2020 figures, the total fall in sales aggregates across Britain and Ireland was something like £78 million. That's money that ultimately is not going into the bank accounts of breeders, and it's not going to fuel their investment in the industry. So that is likely to have an effect. Now, the effects might be delayed at the moment. The government is spending a lot of money that it really doesn't have via quantitative easing or money printing to support the economy by furloughing, by bounce back loans and so on. So potentially some businesses are not as affected as they might be. However, that is going to have a long-term effect. They've either got to increase taxes to get that money back, or there'll be long-term effects on the economy yet to be felt, or there'll be inflation, or they'll have to increase interest rates to deal with inflation, or all of those. I'm not being alarmist about that. It's obvious economics that you can't get something for nothing. So the effects that the government have made, the impact the government's had so far on protecting sales prices in some sales will have an impact. Now, the figures on the right-hand side there, the figures below, the numbers below, show what could happen if foal crops drop by lesser amounts than happened in 2008. So the very bottom line shows the impact of 2008 type figures, actually slightly lower than that, on the number of starts. And instead of recovering right the way up to the top, right back to 9.4, which is where they were in 2019, they will fall steadily to 7.2, which is a major impact on the racing program and a major impact on betting turnover and picture rights and levy income. The very top line is probably the most optimistic projection. What that assumes is that as the racing program comes under pressure, we take some action to reduce the number of races, reducing the least competitive ones in the way that's talked about. But we also take action early on to boost breeding, and the action we can take is to boost British breeding. Now, We can't claim Nostradamus-like powers that this will happen, but you cannot take that amount of money out of the economy and out of the incomes of breeders and it not have an effect. So Houston, we have a problem. Philip, how do we solve it?
Well, I really like this this chart, Brian, because I pushed you into designing this. Yeah, we do have a problem, and that I said earlier that it's folly to think that COVID won't have an impact, because it has to. I mean, in terms of loss of GDP, COVID has contributed significantly more than the 2008 financial crisis. Against that, we've had the government support, which we didn't have in 2008, and all of the furloughing. But you're quite right that with the industry already under pressure, we could do without these blows. You talked about £70 million of bloodstock sales. To put that into context, over the last 3 years, bloodstock sales in the UK have fallen by 40%, and 26% of that came in 2020. They're big numbers. And if you add to that, and that I come back, I've talked about this being a roadmap and making sure that we do have enough product to continue with the racing program and the fixture list in a form and a shape that we have it now. We're exporting 3,500 horses a year. That never before have there been so many racing jurisdictions that look at our product and our tried and tested horses and buy them. Horses in training sale, I think that, and I wish I had the number specifically, but I think that there were over 70 countries represented in last year's horses in training sale. We all can see what the issues are, and that the worst thing that we can do now is to try and sweep it under the carpet. I had an old chairman that absolutely kicked me into shape as a PLC CEO, and he used to say, if you can't measure, you can't manage. So what we're doing here is being able to measure. We know that the industry is under pressure. We know that costs aren't getting any less, that there are nothing is becoming cheaper. But what we do have is that we've got the gold dust. We have the world's gold dust of broodmare band. That if we can continue to encourage and support the development of that broodmare band, then we've got a chance of coming through this. But we've all got to cut our cloth according to cut our caps according to our cloth, and that we've got to make whatever savings that we can, and that it's the TBA's responsibility to try and make things as robust and as sustainable as possible. John Gosden had a quote, and I should have it to hand, but I haven't, when he was talking about the relevance of the industry in 5 years' time. If we also take into account that this year that we've lost 3 major investors in the industry, Prince Khalid, Sheikh Hamdan, and David Thompson, and that there's going to be some consequence there. So again, we need to be doing something about it. But all of these issues are problems on the supply line. What we need to do is to make sure that we have an appropriate supply line, that, and I come back and I don't make no excuses for repeating it, that we have a product that is attractive both as a spectator sport and as a betting proposition.
Yeah. Well, one of the things that you and I hear a lot, Philip, and it's been said in response to this report, and it's said in response to just about every discussion of racing's problem, is that something should be done about prize money. Now, I think we'd agree, we totally agree with that, don't we? If we could wave a magic wand and fix the prize money problem, we would do it. But the TBA doesn't have a magic wand, and I don't believe anyone else in racing has. One of the best ways to fix the prize money problem is long-term levy reform, and the TBA totally supports that. You support it, I support it. But we're not going to achieve that overnight, and we've got a government that has doubtless got other problems to think about than the levy. So comment you've made previously is we have to work with the art of the possible. And some of the things that we're talking about is what's possible. The comment you made about race planning, I think, is absolutely right. The TBA, probably more than anyone else in racing, is interested in the excellence of the racehorse and proving which horses are the best. So we strongly believe, don't we, in a pyramid leading to the top of the pyramid, identifying the best horses in competitive races. And the pattern is important to that. But it's no good to anyone if the pattern races are not competitive, if they don't provide a spectacle for both lovers of racing and people that bet on them. And it's also extremely important that we have competitive racing in lower levels, fueling the pyramid. And high profile handicaps, I know 2 or 3 years ago, you were pushing very heavily for £1 million Eber or £1 million Cesarewitch, equivalent to the Melbourne Cup. And those races are very important. We can't be so purist in the TBA that we think that the whole thing's about the pattern. We have to create, as you said, competitive racing, which is interesting to spectators, interesting to punters, and it drives the money that fuels racing. We can do that in the short term. We don't have to wait for levy reform to do that. The other thing that we sometimes get is complaints when we push what we believe are reasonable initiatives. Many years ago, the TBA pushed for improvements to the Phyllis program on the flat with great support from the BHA. Now, I remember, I'm not a flat breeder, but I'm a fan of flat racing. I remember there were complaints at the time. The Falmouth Stakes is taking away from the Sussex. It's not encouraging these fillies to compete against colts and geldings. It's been proved untrue. Enable made her first several starts in fillies races. After she won the last of those as a 3-year-old, she then won the Arc de Triomphe. Enable is a living example of a horse that came through the fillies program initially and has proved a great success against the colts. In National Hunt, we probably had even greater complaints. At the time that the fillies program was improved in jump racing, again with a lot of help from the BHA, who did a very good job on that, there were complaints of why do we need all these MERS races? Even though at the time, only 20% of the horses running over jumps were MERS. That's a crazy waste of horses that are being produced to race, and it also isn't testing them for development of the breed. Since then, things have happened. We've now had several champion hurdle winners, 3 in the last 6 years, that initially started in MERS races and came through. Last 2 years, Epatante and Honeysuckle, both started in MERS races, both proved able to take on the geldings. We kind of get a different complaint now that the MERS allowance is too much on flat and National Hunt. But basically, these initiatives, which were pushed years ago by the TBA, have started to work. They're having an effect. I guess the question we've got to ask is, can we do more for it?
You know, Brian, I'm going to try and trump you now because I'm going to pull out some numbers. I'm going to pull out some numbers, and that I sat and watched the initial work on the mares program and the elite mares scheme for jumps, and watched that develop. It took 8 years for us to get that to the shape it is today. Currently, we have, I think, something like 24% of the racing population in jumps is fillies and mares, and that the aim is to get that to 30%. The important thing, there are 2 things that I'd like to say there in number terms. Firstly, 8 years ago, these mares were a lost population, and the same applied to flat. And that we talk about getting more bang for our buck and utilising our production line to the most efficiently, but we were letting 20%, 30% of our production line just go off into the ether, and it was nonsensical. The other thing that I think that is really positive now, that we did this 8 years ago, and we're in a much better position now to resist the difficulties that are being placed upon us by economic and COVID circumstances, is that we're now building up a bigger broodmare band. Yeah. We've now got more of a case for these mares to go to stud, and that I know that in the elite mares scheme, which has been hugely successful and really well supported by the levy board, another TBA initiative, but we've got more elite mares, national elite mares in this country than we have, than Ireland has. I think that's right, isn't it?
There is about the same number of elite mares based in this country as in Ireland, which is astonishing because the Irish broodmare population is about 4 times. So yeah, it's emphasised quality to breeders in this country.
That's right, but it is astonishing that 8 years ago we wouldn't have been anywhere near them.
We were nowhere near. No, you're quite right.
So this is a win-win, and the same applies for flat. I sat with Julian Richmond-Watson and Ruth Quinn at the BHA, and we talked about the need to do something for fillies on the flat, and so that we started to enhance the fillies and mares program and encourage more fillies and mares to stay in training. And that ended up with a finals day at Newmarket, which the European Breeders' Fund then happily and generously took over and funded for us. And we started with the little marketing campaign was This Filly Can. We always knew that, and I come back to this, the gold dust were the fillies and mares. And out of all of those initiatives, out of the elite mare scheme, out of the enhancement for fillies and mares, over jumps and flats and mops and plus 10, came the Great British Bonus. I mean, you know, we launched it a year ago, and that you know very well that I've got a soapbox, and I'll get out on my soapbox as far as GBB is concerned. I think it is the most fantastic initiative. I mean, I've worked with you very closely all the way through it. I have the responsibility of marketing. You have a responsibility for the numbers, and that it's prescient that we are here on 27th of May, because a year ago we launched it on the 1st of June. Since then, 2.4 million been paid out in bonus payments, 135 winners, 93 on the flat, 72 on the over jumps, and 24 multiple winners. That doesn't tell the whole story. What this has done is that it's encouraged people to buy fillies. It's made a difference at the sales. At last year's Goff's Premier sales, if you had a GBB registered filly versus a GBB eligible but non-registered filly, you got 40% more for your money. At the last set of National Hunt sales that have just been finished at Doncaster, GBB eligible and registered fillies beat non-registered fillies an average 37%. People were going around and saying, I want to buy GBB fillies. We market it, we manage it, we promote it, and it's working. It's really working. But GBB is the thing that the TBA, it's a TBA initiative. Let nobody misunderstand that. We were well supported by the levy board, and that was absolutely vital and important. But we're spending something like, at the moment, £3 million a year, 2 million from the levy board, £1 million in registration fees, and how we are changing behaviour with that money, it beggars belief. There is an opportunity for us to take this scheme on. Now, you can't get in there. I've got my soapbox out.
I noticed that. I was going to say you're on the soapbox. And
there is an opportunity for us now. What we needed to do was to prove that this worked. We needed to prove that we were responsible and capable of managing it, because, you know, there have been incidents in the past, not via TBA, but where things haven't worked quite as well. And that we needed to show both breeders, owners, trainers, and the whole of the industry that this could make a difference. It is, and the opportunity exists there to extend and enhance that scheme. You can go now.
I'm left dumbfounded with your eloquence, Philip. One of the things I comment on, though, is the phrase you used about changing behaviour, because that's really what we try to do in every initiative we've had. It's no good saying, oh, this is good, let's give money to breeders. That would not change behaviour. We're trying to change behaviour by encouraging people to do things that are in the best interest of British racing and British breeding. And that's what the initiatives you've talked about all are. The MERS programme on flat and jumps, MOPS initially over jumps, GBB later. They're all trying to incentivise the behaviour that we want, which is for owners and trainers to invest in British horses and race them in this country. And as you said earlier, we can't rely on imports, which some people say, oh, well, if there aren't enough horses bred in this country, we'll get imports, because we're actually becoming an increasing exporter. Other countries have the same problems, and they're looking to horses over here to fill the gap. So we can't rely on on imports. We must continue to change behaviour. And we've said it before, the best tool we have at the moment to change behaviour is to improve GBB and enhance it to create the behaviour we want, which is for people to seek out more British bred horses and to encourage British breeders to produce more of them to fill the racing programme we've got. But of course, we're promoting the TBA and we're TBA board members, but the TBA can't do it on its own, can it, Philip?
No, it can't. And I think that GBB, I mean, that's a prime example. That this is a TBA initiative, but the whole of the industry has got behind it, and that they trusted us, and that they can now see the benefits of it. We have to work collectively. What we need to do is all of us try and see each other's point of view, support each other, and come back to what, you stealing my thunder and me stealing your thunder, the art of the possible.
Yeah.
That's what's really important. We can work together, and we do work together really well sometimes, and that the way out of this, on this roadmap that we've provided, we all need to get behind levy reform. We don't need to be to have different voices saying different things. We need to agree an objective, and it won't always be the optimum objective for the specific body, but we need to agree objective and go for it. And one of the reasons why this paper is so important and the economic impact studies have been so important is that the TBA can then give the data to the people that are in charge of levy reform and say, these are the facts, because it will only be government that are able to change our situation.
Philip, when you were in full flow a few minutes ago, Olivia sent me a question which was asked by our remaining listener, which I believe was first aired in a webinar about the life of someone who was called Bryan with an I. What has the TBA ever done for us?
I can't, do you know that I get so cross about this, I do. My soapbox is out again. The TBA is the best 150 quid that anybody spends in this industry, bar nothing else. To start with, there's GBB, that if you get a filly, you get 200 quid off your first registration. There's the Mayor's programme that we've talked about, that we worked on for 8 years. Some people think that the TBA has got a magic wand that you alluded to earlier. We haven't. What we do have is grit and determination, and a focus and a strategy and a determination to see the job through. The Mayor's programme is a case in point. 8 years and we're now making a difference. We want to provide support for stayers at some stage down the road. We've got to do that because we need a diverse racing programme that forms part of the spectator appeal and the uniqueness of the British product. GBB is going to mitigate some of the financial consequences. We can keep pushing this and pushing it and pushing it, and that if the breeders don't feel that they are seriously economically compromised when they get a filly on the ground, and that they know that GBB is in behind it and that there is going to be a market for those fillies, it's going to make a difference. But the TBA 5 years ago, before any other industry did it, commissioned a report, and that was provided, again, used the expression roadmap for us to negotiate through the difficulties that we got. Okay, so that we haven't been able to get the perfect solution, but nobody could under these circumstances. We've got a damn sight better solution than we would have. There was the COVID protocols. We swung straight into action, and that I could never have been more impressed with the TBA executive than I was over COVID. It was unbelievable how it was just like it was like an army on the move. And if we hadn't got into it, if Claire hadn't got right behind it, I can guarantee you that last year's covering season would have been significantly compromised. Then you've got all of the other things we do: membership support, there's insurance, there is legal advice, there is VAT advice, and then we've just launched TBA, which is the new learning platform. which is going to provide real opportunity for the industry going on. The TBA, it never stops giving, and I bow to nobody. I really believe in the TBA and what we do, and that it's hard work, and that sometimes you don't get thanked for it, but it's necessary because it's vital that this industry survives. We've been handed this industry 300 years of legacy, tradition, and history. We're the best in the world. We produce 24% of the world's best racehorses from a foal crop of 4,500. Ireland, 18% from a foal crop twice the size. That says we need to do everything that we can to protect this and to drive this industry forward.
Yeah, but apart from the MERS program and support for middle distance horses and stayers and GBB and the GBB discounts and the work on COVID and Brexit and TBA and membership support, you really don't get a lot for your £150, Philip.
Yeah, do you know what? I think that people should pay 150 quid just to see you and I this morning.
Don't flatter yourself. I'm not. Anyway, I can now come to the bit that I feel very comfortable with, where we can go to a slide, a professional slide. This is the slide. The next slide, please, Oliver. This is the slide that always happens in presentations, where you tell people what you've said already, so you can say it again, hopefully in slightly different words. Basically, we have problems, potential problems because of COVID. We've mentioned that, the COVID crisis. We have problems because of the loss of major international breeders to British breeding. They're likely to put us under pressure. So we've got to take action to resolve that. Philip.
We need to capitalise on our international reputation for breeding and racing. You talked about the pyramid early on. It's absolutely vital that we invest in the top end. We invest in at the top end of our races, the top end of our breeding rate. That's not to say that the pyramid isn't important, but it is. But what we sell internationally in terms of a concept, in terms of a product, is our high quality horses and our high quality racing. And we need to make sure that we don't have that diluted at all. That has to be a clear road for us to follow.
Yeah, and as we said, the racing program is paramount in terms of generating interest to to racing fans, breeders, spectators, and better gamblers. It's the most important thing that we have to think about. So the racing program really has to be competitive. It really has to be diverse at all levels. It involves identifying the best horses, which as breeders we want to do, but we've got to identify the best horses amongst colts and geldings as well as mares. We've got to identify the best horses over different distances, different disciplines, flat, hurdles, chases. All of that is important. We must have a racing program that creates interest and not lots of boring races that really don't attract the attention that we need for the industry.
Okay, we're going to we improve the viability of British breeding and a lot of British breeders. It's not an overnight thing, but, and again, I come back and I'm going to make no excuse for going back, but 8 years ago, the fillies and mares program under both codes started to be enhanced. As a consequence now, we've got a different market for fillies and mares. What we've got to do is that we've got to put the foundations down for the industry to make progress. And that means that we've got to address the little things as much as we've got to address the big things. GBB is a fantastic opportunity for us, and that we're now a year on. I think that the industry is going to support extensions to it. We have aspirations to extend it. I make no excuse whatsoever for say buy British. You know, I remember when I grew up, you know, buy British, and that the GBB campaign is going to enhance that. And that just one final thing, it didn't come before time, because the French have got their premium scheme, the Irish have got something. In the US, 22 of the racing states have all got similar types of scheme. Australia is doing really well on them, and they compete New South Wales to Queensland to Victoria. They all have their own. This was not before time, but we're on the way now. Yes, it's going to take time. Yes, there are going to be difficulties along the path, but we've started the journey.
Fourth point we've talked about. We need united industry action to achieve urgent level reform. There is no doubt that that is probably the best means of achieving prize money increases that we all agree, but it's not going to be a quick fix. It will take time. The whole industry has to get together behind it to make it happen. If only it were a quick fix, wonderful. It isn't. We've got to work hard to get that. In the meantime, we've got to do things that are possible.
We've got to remember that that mistake was made in 1962 when the Betting and Gaming Act allowed that, and that the industry let it happen. And now, and we've always been on the back foot since then. Another thing that we need to do is to increase ownership, because if we increase ownership, if we increase awareness of our racing product, then the product that we provide for racing is going to have a higher value. I sit on Great British Racing, a board member for the TBA. I think it's worth pointing out here, I think there are 36 either boards or committees that the TBA is represented on in the industry, so that if anybody says, what are you doing, one of us is always on a board meeting or a committee meeting. And we've got a fantastic executive at Stansted House, and that they should be encouraged, and that you should be really enthusiastic about them. But going back to GBR, we now have an initiative, a joint initiative along with the Racehorse Owners Association to have a massive campaign to increase ownership. You're going to see big things starting to happen to attract new owners and breeders, both in the racing stock and in breeding stock from September onwards. And I'm really excited about that. GBR is, every industry needs a marketing and comms tool, and GBR does an extremely good job for the British racing product and the British racing people.
Yeah, and the last thing is we've got to take the blinkers off and don't think that everything we do is perfect and that other people don't have better ideas, because very often other countries do have better ideas. You've mentioned that the French have had the premium scheme for many years, which has redeveloped French breeding and transformed it. There are similar schemes in different states of the USA that are creating stronger breeding industries from them there, for those there, so that they're important initiatives. As a jumps breeder, one of the major initiatives I really think we need to do something about is to encourage earlier racing of jumps horses. For years, the French bred horses have been beating our horses in our races because they are raced earlier. They're taught to jump earlier over hurdles as 3-year-olds. And the Irish increasingly are racing their horses as 4-year-olds in point to points. We saw the results of those at Cheltenham. British trained horses were completely obliterated in terms of their top prizes. A British bred horse won one of the major prizes in Honeysuckle, but the British race horses didn't, probably because they were at a big disadvantage against the Irish and the French. I think something like 12 of the 13 Grade 1 winners started their careers either in point to points or in French hurdles. Only one of them started in the traditional route of bumpers. So basically, in whatever respect we can, let's look at what's happening abroad. Let's not think we've automatically got the best answers. Take the blinkers off and take what works there and apply it here. That's the final recommendation.
You know, Brian, that both of us are retailers, and that it's always better to be a follower than an innovator, because then you don't have to make the mistakes of developing the product.
That's true. If you follow the ones that work, that's a very good guide. Yeah.
Yeah, and you and I are going to get serious brownie points from Miss Olivia May, because we were told 40 minutes, and what have we done?
Good heavens!
I think we're right on the money. Is that right, Olivia?
That was perfect. Thank you very much. We just have time for a few questions, and we've had quite a few sent through from our viewers. So the first one we have is, why do all media rights go to racecourses? Without the horse, media rights are worthless. So why don't breeders' owners get at least a share of them directly to support their activities financially?
I think that's one for our deputy chairman, Olivia. It's way above my level to answer that one.
I come to this collective approach. What we've agreed upon is a collective approach, and that all of the rights have been allocated appropriately for the time being. There are discussions going on as far as the split of media rights money, but what I do think is that the final answer for everything is prize money. That we've got to increase prize money, and that trying to split things off and give something to Tom and something to Dick and something to Harry is not going to work at all. We need to be in this together and be seen to be in it together, and make certain that all of us that are in this are getting an appropriate share, not a disproportionate share of what's on. We will only move the whole of this industry forward with a collective approach, and prize money is top of the agenda for that.
I'd just make a comment on that. My understanding is that media rights legally belong to the racecourses, so negotiation is appropriate between the BHA, the Horsemen's Group, and the racecourses to get an appropriate distribution of those in the best interest of British racing. In terms of taking elements of the pot and handing it to different people, that really isn't changing behaviour. Changing behaviour is about investing money from the pot in the best interest of the whole of racing. So lots of breeders in the past have said, oh, we should have this and we should have that. What they've got is GBB, which can change the behaviour of potential buyers to look at their horses and buy them because they're British and they're in GBB. And that's the approach we've got to follow, changing the behaviour, not handing out small amounts of money that really wouldn't change anything.
Perfect. Thank you very much. Hopefully that's all sorted it. Just putting sort of two questions together here. We've got, how is the TBA and/or the industry encouraging new breeders and owners into the business? And how will the GB industry persuade me to move my stock back from France?
Well, I'll deal with the first part, and you can have the second part, Brian. The first part is quite simple, and it comes down to, we will encourage people into the industry if there is a sensible investment return for doing so. That one of the big problems that we have in the industry is that a third of all of our breeders are in inverted commas small breeders, 1 or 2 mares. They are absolutely vital to the racing programme. That if we lost 1,500 foals, we would have significant difficulties, and that they are under all sorts of pressure. We hope that GBB is a step down the road. And as I said when we were talking earlier, we've got to look at this, that the breeding industry is like a great big ocean liner, and trying to turn it takes a lot of time and a lot of effort. Things are improving, but we are only going to encourage commercial breeders and into this industry if we solve the problem of prize money. We can improve the investment returns, that we can ensure that we say top of the racing pile in terms of horses produced, in terms of racing program. And we are never going to get to where Australia and Hong Kong are like on prize money, because they have a completely different funding structure. But what we do have is that we are the best at what we do. If we continue to underpin that, we will attract foreign investment, we will attract overseas investors, the same as we have over the last 30 to 40 years, and that we will improve the lot for everybody in the industry.
Olivia, what was the second question? I didn't quite catch it.
How will the GB industry persuade me to move my stock back from France?
Well, Philip's given part of the answer already. British racing inherently is more interesting in many ways than French racing. And if we follow the strategy we're talking about of clear pyramid, interesting racing via handicaps, the possibility for GBB prizes to create significant rewards for the owners and the breeders so that people look for their horses, all of those actions that we've talked about in the whole of this webinar will basically have that effect. But ultimately, it's an issue for the breeder. Personally, I prefer to race my horses here, even though the prize money is higher in France, because it's more fun. It's more fun to meet fellow breeders at race courses and talk about it and share the experiences. That is the key thing we've got. British racing is fun, and we emphasize that and we keep it as fun. If you go to France, it's very sophisticated to go to Auteuil and have a nice lunch and not be actually affected by there being any people there. But British racing is more fun, and that's one of the reasons. But we've got to fix the economic factors as well. They're the two parts to it.
Perfect. Thank you very much. Just a couple more. What are the roles and responsibilities of the different sectors of this industry? What can these sectors do to assist in the recovery process and assist in making it stronger than before?
It's a big one.
Well, both Bryan and I, that we see varying parts of the industry. I sit on the BHA racing group, I sit on GBR, and that we're all heading in the same direction. We all want the same thing, and that there's a lot of squabbling that goes on, and that it's an unseemly squabbling, and that but in general terms, that we all want the same thing. That everybody's working towards an enhanced prize money opportunity for the country, and that if we can do that, then everything else falls into place. I understand that each individual sector has, as I said, has its own agenda and what is in best interests for their own particular membership. But generally, and that we're well led by the BHA. And the BHA do a good lot. They perform magic tricks sometimes in trying to keep everybody's interests aligned. But as a generalisation, I think there's more things to be positive about as far as that's concerned than there are to be negative.
I'd just say that the BHA, in my experience, are always trying to take the view of what's best for British racing, which is their job. The Levy Board always consider what's best for British racing and breeding and their other statutory responsibilities and look at things objectively. And if you make a case to either body, you have a very good chance for it to be accepted. Some of the other bodies in racing have to look after particular membership interests, but generally those membership interests are all served by, if British racing succeeds, then the members come out better. The TBA is in a very unusual position in that we're not a trade union, we're not a members organisation, we're a charity with an objective that we have to maximise the benefits for British breeding. So we have to think about what's best for British breeding. Now that inevitably involves thinking about what's best for British racing, where many of the horses race. So we have an objective of doing what's best for the interests of the breed, and as Philip said, keeping this breed heritage alive for another 300 years, long after anyone watching this is gone. But basically, as long as we focus on the big picture of doing what's best for British racing, and then everyone gets out of that an appropriate share, that's the way it works. It's sometimes a struggle. It's harder than running a business because it's different businesses together. But the big picture is the key picture to have.
Perfect. Thank you very much. The disconnect between countryside and city will likely widen further as digitalisation of our lives increases. House and land prices continue to outpace wage growth. What recommendations are made to make owning breeding accessible or a return of investment rewarding?
I think it's safe to say that we can't comment objectively on how to control land prices. They're economic factors way outside our ability to influence. What we can say is that you don't have to own a stud in order to breed horses, in order to breed racehorses. There are many studs that provide facilities to keep mares, to raise young stock and to sell young stock on your behalf. I don't own a stud. I've got 20 brood mares and my mares are all boarded somewhere else at a very reasonable rate. Other people can do the same. There are many studs offering an excellent service. The people running those studs understand about land management. They understand about all the many different things you have to do when a mare's ready to foal. They do a very good job. Lets the breeder have the fun part of working out which mare to breed from, which stallion to go to, and then dreaming about producing a top-class racehorse and earning the rewards that come from that. You don't need a stud to be a breeder.
I think that that's absolutely right. But the other thing that I would say, which tries to answer this more directly. It just comes back to the investment case for breeding. If we can improve the investment case, then the asset values that go to support that may become more affordable.
Yeah, yeah, that's true.
And can I do one last thing, Olivia, please, and do a commercial?
What, robust and sustainable, you're going to say, are you?
No, I'm not going to say robust and sustainable. I'm just going to remind our single listener that the GBV 2020 yearling registration period closes on Monday, May the 31st, and that thereafter it's a sealed unit. So don't miss out on the opportunity if you've still got fillies to register.
And I've got to say that I've listened into the appeal process that Philip masterminds, and he shows no mercy for late entries. Get them in now.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Philip and Bryan. So we've tried to answer as many questions as we can today, but if there's any others you think of afterwards, please just contact us via the information on the TBA website, and any other feedback at all is all welcome. So all I've got left to say is thank you very much, Philip and Bryan, and for everyone who's attended, and we will hopefully see you very soon.